Eric reached financial independence a few years ago, which means technically he doesn't have to work anymore, but he is still hesitating to quit his job. He needs to overcome some psychological barriers to telling his boss to buzz off. Let's talk to Eric and figure out how to crack through that anxiety. My name's Paula Pant, and I'm the host of the Afford Anything podcast. What you're about to hear is an excerpt from the podcast in which myself and my buddy, the former financial planner Joe Saul-Sehy, answer questions that come from our community. Here's Eric.
Hi, Paula. Longtime listener, first-time caller. My wife and I reached FI a few years ago in our mid-40s, and I'm deciding whether now is the time to retire from full-time employment. I don't intend to fully retire, but continue earning part-time income as a consultant, coach, and teacher in my field, along with volunteering in our local church community. I'm also looking to optimize work-life balance and to be a great husband and dad. We currently have about $2.1 million in investments, including about $1.5 million in tax-deferred retirement accounts. In addition, we also have a free and clear home worth about $1.1 million. At a 4% withdrawal rate, we have about $86,000 in annual spending power. Based on the past year of spending, I estimate we'll spend about $80,000 to $90,000 per year on necessary and regular discretionary expenses. We have occasional one-time expenses that go beyond our normal spending. This may include home repairs and improvements, emergencies, and other unexpected expenses. I have a few questions before taking the leap. With so much of our net worth tied up in pre-tax retirement accounts, how can we minimize taxes and penalties for early withdrawal? I've heard of the Roth conversion ladder and 72T scheduled payments, but I'm not familiar with the details of those strategies. Our $600,000 in taxable investments are unlikely to sustain us for the next decade plus until we reach 59 and a half. My second question is more psychological. Are we truly ready to retire? What's the best way to handle the emotional impact of switching from saving to withdrawing from our investments? What if the market takes a big hit shortly after we leave the workforce? What if we incur a large, unexpected emergency expense? My wife is especially nervous about making this transition, and it would be great to ease her concerns before making any big decisions. Doing this together is very important. Thank you for all that you do.
Eric, first of all, congratulations on reaching FI. You started the question by saying you reached FI for the first-time listeners, new listeners who have never heard of that acronym before. FI, financial independence, is the point at which work becomes optional, as it is for you now, the point at which you have sufficient investments that you could draw down from them and live on them. So defining that for anyone who's new to the show, and huge congratulations to you for reaching that point.
It's a nice spot to be.
Right? I want to start with the psychological component of your question first. You mentioned that you will still be earning some part-time income from coaching, consulting, and teaching. So the first thing that strikes me is that even though the amount that you can draw down at the 4% withdrawal rate is equivalent to your annual spending between $80,000 to $90,000, so you've got that one-to-one matchup. In spite of that, it sounds as though you'll still be earning some type of part-time income. I don't know how much that's going to be, maybe 20 grand, maybe 40 grand, but whatever that is, what that signals to me is that you likely won't even have to draw down the entire 4%, because at least some of your spending will be offset from your income. Either that or the one-time expenses, the home repairs and maintenance, the renovations, any major unexpected medical bills. Perhaps that is the aspect that would be covered by part-time income, while the ordinary expenses are covered by the 4%. But one way or the other, whether it's ordinary expenses 4% and one-time expenses part-time, or whether it's less than 4% for the first 1 or 2 or 3 years while you get used to the transition, either way, the fact that you will still have some degree of income coming in should really smooth the ride, both logistically as well as hopefully also psychologically.
There's a couple things that I'd like to add when it comes to the psychological part. I think those early conversations, Paula, and focusing with him and his spouse on what they truly value is going to be very important because, to your point, the spending in those early years, I mean, he is so close. he's right on the line with his spending matching up to what the 4% rule is. If he's spending about what he thinks he can spend, then making sure that he's focused in on getting the most value for his money, I think is going to be really important. If they don't value it, don't spend that money. The other thing I think is playing the probability game, which is there's a big probability that he will be healthier during his early years in retirement and less healthy the longer he's retired. I love this idea of income streams, but I always get worried when people tell us that they're going to continue working into, quote, retirement, because two things happen. You fall in love with your time off, number one, but also number two, back to the health aspect, you might not end up being healthy as for as long as you want to be. In fact, the number one reason people retire is not that they want to, it's that they have to. They actually retire at a different age than they would have told you 10 years earlier. People are often surprised, and it's usually earlier. So I would take advantage of that consulting stuff early on, and it's going to have a two-pronged approach. Number one is it's going to ease off needing to access so much money early on because he has these income streams coming in. And number two, it's also going to help him with, giving him a little bit extra time. He doesn't have to make all these big, heady value decisions that I talked about earlier. He's not going to have to make all those at once. He can kind of get his feet wet a little bit. So I like the idea of this part-time retirement thing, but working more and just kind of putting his foot in the pool a little bit.
Right. It'll also add some structure to his day. Because, Eric, I think one thing that you're going to find when you leave your full-time job is that if there's no structure to your day, that's just as bad. It's the opposite, but it's the same as a day that is overly structured or too booked or too busy. They're opposite problems, but they're also the same problem.
Well, there's a study, Paula, that our mutual friend, Wes Moss, talks about in his book about what the happiest retirees know. And they have a lot of hobbies. I don't remember the number. I think it's 4. At one time I knew what it was. They go into retirement with 4 hobbies. And I think what the hobbies represent are exactly what you're talking about, which is transition from this structured work day to this structured day of kind of being an entrepreneur toward these hobbies that I didn't have time for before. I think structure is definitely the name of that game.
Right. And what's beautiful about that is that structure is not necessarily synonymous with earning money. So, Eric, some of the things that you might do in retirement include money-making activities like teaching, consulting, coaching. Some of the things that you do might be volunteering for your church or for community organizations, as you mentioned. And some of those things might be taking up a new sport or a new hobby or a new fitness program. Maybe you'll get really into chess or swimming. Or playing chess underwater chess. There we go. Underwater chess. Someone needs to invent it. Eric, you can invent it.
There's a hobby.
But the other aspect, you asked about the psychological component of drawing down, switching from a saver mindset to a withdrawal mindset. And that is psychologically very challenging. If you haven't really come face to face with scarcity mindset, then the worst of your scarcity demons start to flare up when you are no longer actively making contributions into your accounts, when instead you are drawing down from those accounts. That really is where the head game happens. That is where the fear of not having enough starts to flare. And there are a few ways to work on that. One is internal. It could be through journaling, through therapy, through prayer or meditation. So one piece of it is the internal coming face to face with the scarcity demons and what they represent. The other piece of grappling with that is social and community-based. Filling your schedule with reminders that you have a support system, that you have a village in place that will catch you if you fall. That comes from deepening relationships, from spending more time with friends, with family, with community, from becoming really good buddies with your underwater chess player team.
Community.
Right? Exactly. The more secure we feel within our community, within our village, the more we know that no matter what happens, I'll be okay because I've got that combination of both radical self-reliance as well as community. Either one in isolation is not sufficient, but having both together, that's what creates a true safety net. There was an interview that we did with an author by the name of Ken Honda. And Joe, I know you've interviewed him too.
You and I had a long conversation. Remember? We had like a 2-hour conversation after we interviewed Ken Honda the first time, because I'm so taken with this philosophy.
Exactly. He is known as Japan's Zen millionaire. And in fact, it is one of our most popular YouTube uploads. It's not even a video, but it had, 200 and something thousand views. So what he said really resonated with people. One of the many things he said was, make a list of people whose couches you and your family could sleep on in the event of the worst case scenario. Let's say, I don't know, a cyclone hits your town, but you don't have cyclone insurance because you live in Kansas City and no one ever expects a cyclone to come down there, right? Joe was looking at me like I'm a total weirdo.
Are you saying there's no tornadoes in Kansas? Is that what you're saying?
No. I'm thinking, the hurricane, the water cyclone.
Oh, what? Well, you ever see The Wizard of Oz? At least tell me you've seen The Wizard of Oz. We're not in Kansas anymore because there was a cyclone in Kansas.
A water cyclone, the hurricane kind.
And I know everybody's shouting at their device. Kansas City's in Missouri. Okay, it's right there though. We're so close.
Welcome to the Meteorology Podcast.
Yes, that's right. But no, this is the part of our net worth that, I'm totally on board with this, because this is a part of our net worth we don't pay enough attention to. And it is a huge, huge piece of
our social capital.
Yeah, my feeling of security, and I've said this before, really took a turn for the better when I realized not that I had enough money, but that I had enough relationships that even if the money failed, that we would find a way. That I have enough people, and this is a fantastic feeling when you know that you've got people that are on your team enough that we will probably be okay no matter what happens with our money. I don't want to ever have to rely on those, but that's a big piece of it, Paula.
Right.
I think the most important piece when we talk about community, because, he talks about how worried his spouse gets about this. I think this is where my idea of this weekly 20-minute easy meeting comes in. You set a timer for 20 minutes. You don't have the big epic conversations. I know money nerds want to have the 2.5-hour Camp David summit. We don't need that. We just need 20 minutes. Look at what we spent last week. Look at how much we're going to spend next week. And that's it.
It's called Camp Fi, not Camp David.
Camp
there
Fi
really
meeting.
is a Camp Fi.
Yeah. It could be Camp Fi, Camp Mustache. We all want to have the Camp Mustache meeting. It doesn't have to be this epic conversation. Cheryl and I have found that if we have these every week, and if you're single, you still have them. A lot of our single people in the community have written me that they've done this weekly meeting and it works really well. Because you know why? Whether we're single, whether we're in a relationship, we just don't take the 20 minutes to do this, to have this self-talk of looking through it. But especially for the two of them, I think it's about the two of them being okay week by week on this really tactical week by week basis that our spending is okay inside of the confines of how close we are to that financial independence mark.
Oprah wrote this fantastic book. It's called What Happened to You. She talks about how to deal with feelings of anxiety. Historically, 1,000 years ago, bad stuff happened to people all the time. And this was way before we had modern therapy. 1,000 years ago, bad stuff happened to people and there was no such thing as going to counseling. So how did people deal? There are 3 components to re-regulating that she talked about in that book: movement, rhythm, and community. Walking is a form of movement, a low impact, free form of movement that also is very rhythm based. Walking, listening to music, and being around community, being around friends, family, even just neighbors, right? They don't necessarily have to be your closest of relationships. If you have what Robert Putnam in his book Bowling Alone refers to as weak ties, people in your neighborhood whose faces you recognize, even if you don't necessarily remember their names, just seeing those same people every single day on your morning walk. That's a huge part of feeling as though you belong to the fabric of a society. And that itself is a huge piece of staying regulated.
I think that ties in well with his comment of seeking work-life balance. There's definitely a tie there. I want to caution him though about work-life balance because I don't believe that's a thing. I just don't believe it. In fact, I spoke recently, I interviewed a wonderful entrepreneur named Tina Wells, who has been an amazing entrepreneur since she was, I believe, 14 or 15 years old, Paula. She wrote a new book called The Elevation Approach. Of course, people can listen to me talk to her if you just go over to Stacking Benjamins, but her book, Elevation Approach, talks about work-life balance is baloney. There's no such thing. And I tend to agree with that. But what we're actually searching for is work-life synergy. And I know this might sound...
work-life integration.
Yeah, it might sound... what is it called?
Jargony?
Semantics. It might sound like
right.
semantics, but it truly is. She's like, listen, there's times when you're working and you got to work 24/7. There are periods of life when that happens. But you also have to make sure that 24/7 fits into your overall fabric of your life. So if you seek work-life balance, you'll get neither. But if you're okay with the ebb and flow because it all fits into your life plan, that is a much better approach. Meaning maybe I work 24/7 today, but I take the week off next week or, whatever it might be. So just starting with the end in mind there of, I really want this harmony together. It's a better way. Cause I don't know, before I talked to Tina, I'd search for work-life balance forever. And it just doesn't happen.
Right.
It's a losing proposition. But what I do want to have happen is I want to be in the moment with the person I'm with when I'm there.
Right. You want presence.
Yes. And that is truly what I meant by work-life balance. When I'm at home, I want to be at home. When I'm at work, I want to be at work.
Joe, you work from home.
Damn. I get it both.
When you work from home, you live at work.
That's the bear. If somebody would have told me that, well, and you know what's funny there, Paul? I mean, I know you're cracking a joke, but from working from home, you have to create the boundaries there too, because for people, and people found this out during the pandemic, working from home is not all it's cracked up to be. And
right.
that we start crossing these lines, and you saw people in this malaise of, well, I'm half at work and I'm not really at work, and I'm half at home and I'm not really at home. And you have to set this hard out. I'm done for the day. I am done. Mm-hmm. And now I'm at home. I'm not at work. And now I'm at work. I'm not at home. Like it's got to be this hard line in your mind. Otherwise, not only will you continue to cheat on that, if you work for somebody, we've all had bosses that are like, oh, well, you're sitting right next to the computer. Why don't you just do this? No, I'm not at work. If I was at work, you wouldn't even have the opportunity to ask me that. But now that you know that I work from home, you think I could just sneak over the computer for half an hour, which by the way, turns into 45 minutes, turns into an hour and a half, turns into, I miss dinner. I miss my family. I miss everything.
Right, right. And what's funny, Joes, is so a few minutes ago, you were talking about integration. Now we're talking about boundaries. And what's funny is there has to be a blend of both.
Yes.
So on a day-to-day basis, when it is appropriate, those boundaries need to be there. But sometimes you're working on a project where you're, think interval training, right? Sprint, rest, sprint, rest. Sometimes you're working on a project where you're sprinting. I'm thinking about my thesis right now, working on that thesis, what Columbia called quote unquote winter break. And I'm using air quotes when I say that. That was an effing sprint to that first draft, January 13. So the quote unquote winter break that we had was actually hell. It was every single day with no break, just sprinting to that January 13th deadline of getting the first draft of that thesis in. Man, I remember There was a period after that of about 4 days where I was like, I got to do laundry. I need to order groceries. Yeah.
And this is the work-life synergy. The other side has to then come back. So knowing that you're there 24/7 for X number of days, you then have to have a counterweight for some time. I love the idea. Jim Rohn presents a congruent idea. He and Tony Schwartz in a book. It's several years old now. God, this book might be 20 years old, but it's about managing your energy and not your time.
Yes.
And I think that is huge. Think of yourself like a tennis player. Tennis players have a year-round schedule. And so they don't get these big breaks. So they have to decide which tournaments are the truly important ones and which parts am I just working on little things? Which ones am I completely in and which ones am I there, but I'm getting other pieces of my life in order, or I just don't attend. So you have to manage your energy. I like that idea as kind of a congruent argument to this.
Should we address the logistical piece of Eric's question?
Nah. This is far more fun. Why don't I dive into 72T for just a moment?
Sure.
So for people that don't know what the heck Eric's talking about when he says, I know Rule 72T, but I don't know it intricately, what that means is 72T allows you to take money out of your IRAs pre-59 and a half, get around some of these penalties that he's talking about in a way that you're able to set yourself up with an income stream. So the IRS has a few different ways to do it, but basically here's what happens. You take the value of the IRA, you stretch that out over your life using one of a few different IRS calculations that they have. There's 3 really basic ones, but one's kind of flat line. The other 2 are based on different ways to calculate what inflation would be. You then take for 5 years or till 59 and a half, whichever one's later. So as an example, if it's 57 and you start this, you got to go 5 years to not violate the rule. If you start at age 50, you go to 59 and a half because 59 and a half is later. So you set these up and you get, for what we're talking about, just on a high level, you get a consistent pension-like paycheck that comes out of your IRA. And as long as you do it that way, you can decide whether you want it monthly, quarterly, however you want it. They don't really care. But it's got to be the same. You got to use the same methodology every year. You can't go, ooh, this way of calculating it fits me better this year. This way fits me next year. As long as you keep it the same, you can continue to take these payments from your IRA and not pay any penalties. It's a great way to do it for a couple of reasons. Number one, Eric is worried about making sure that he's got this consistent lifestyle, right? And that he doesn't overstretch himself. Well, using 72T makes that great. I mean, you are legally obligated to take the same amount out. So you can't spend extra money from the IRA on other things. It's got to be this set amount. It also helps people early in retirement kind of regulate their spending and get used to spending that's the same with the threat of all these penalties hanging over them. So you don't spend more money than you should because of 72T. On the other side, a lot of people early in retirement, that's when they want to buy the RV, or they might invest in a vacation home or an expensive vacation, whatever that might be. On the downside, you're going to have to find other resources for that. So from a high level, that's how 72T, called the SEPP rule, works. I would recommend heartily finding a CPA or a CFP who's done this before and work with them. I might pay them for a couple hours of their time at the very least, because you don't want to mess it up.
We will also link to an episode in the show notes, which we dedicated to really deep diving into the mechanics of SEPP 72T. That was episode 94, which we deemed the early retirement episode. One of the questions that you might want to ask a financial planner is which strategy would be better, SEPP 72T or using a Roth conversion ladder. My hunch is that SEPP 72T is going to be a better fit because a Roth conversion ladder is going to come with major tax penalties, and the $600,000 that you have in taxable brokerage accounts that you're going to be drawing from was probably not money that you want to spend on taking the tax hit associated with a Roth conversion. But of course, clear that with a financial planner and with an accountant who is looking directly at your account statements. That's my early hunch based on what you've said.
Mine too.
As far as the $600,000 not lasting until you're 59 and a half, I think working is both the logistical and the psychological solution to that. Obviously not working full time, but even if you can bring in 20 grand a year, doing something light and fun, 20 grand a year, it doesn't sound like a whole lot, but in terms of the way that's going to affect your drawdown, in terms of how it'll impact your ability to deal with one-time expenses such as a kitchen remodel, in terms of the way it'll help you cope with moments of inflation when the price of eggs suddenly shoots up and then back down again.
Oh, that would never happen.
Right? Just a smidge extra goes a long way.
And I think to put a point on what you just said, Paula, because the working, which is not the right answer for everybody, but I think it's going to be for Eric, because from the psychological point of view and the fiscal point of view, it makes sense in both alleys. Like, how often do we answer questions from people where doing X thing would be the best financial move, but it doesn't fit what the end goal is? And we see people do that all the time.
Right.
Or, just this idea where the value clashes with the goal. So the fact that I feel like working a little more is going to solve both the issues, I think that generally points to the right answer for me.
Hey, YouTube family. So we are testing something, and this is actually going to be the last week that we are running this test. We are testing whether or not we should break out these questions into shorter individual episodes. Did you like it better when we would post these questions as one big hour-long episode? Or do you like it better now where we are posting shorter snippets with each question being its own standalone episode? We've been running this experiment for a few weeks. This is going to be the last week that we are running the experiment, the last week that we're collecting feedback. After this, we are going to make a decision as to what we're going to do from this point forward. So please drop a note in the comments. Let us know. What do you think? Do you like it better as one big hour-long episode? Do you like it better with these shorter snippets? Let us know. Thank you so much. And we'll announce the final verdict shortly.